live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Manji Nadia Kwaka, and I am an intern here at NBM Graphic Novels. And it is my absolute pleasure to be interviewing the one and only Jeffrey Brown today. Jeffrey is a New York best-selling author, and he is known for his autobiographical approach when it comes to writing comics and storytelling. So, Jeffrey, I'm gonna give you the floor to introduce yourself briefly, and we can get into today's interview.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Jeffrey Brown. I'm a cartoonist, and most people know me from my Star Wars books, um, which are just humorous takes on the Star Wars films. But yeah, I started out with autobiographical comics, and I still make those, and that's the book I have with NBM, Kids Are Still Weird, which is kind of a collection of funny moments from my younger son, and you know, like just how smart kids are, even when they don't realize it. Um, and I think one of the reasons I wrote that book was, as a parent, there's lots of times where it's like there's stress and frustration, but I try to remind myself that it's actually pretty entertaining having kids, and and those are, if you focus on that, that makes that stress a little easier to take.
Nice. So we are going to talk about the kids are still weird. I enjoyed it. I think your son and my nephew are are two in the same pod. Well, just wanted to get a few introductory opening questions off the grid. So I read up about you, and I found out that you at some point didn't always write comics. So I just wanted to kind of gauge, when did you actually start? How was that process like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I started, like, as a kid. I loved comics, and I loved drawing, I loved writing, and comics were like the perfect combination of both. And um, I would, you know, I liked Garfield, so I'd write my own Garfield comics. I liked superheroes. I would draw my own superhero comics, and then I would do little illustrated books, like write, kind of science fiction stories that were basically, stolen from whatever movies or TV shows I was watching, and make little illustrated books. And that was always my dream when I was a kid. I was like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to draw comics. And by the time I got to high school and college, I had kind of, lost interest in reading comics as much, and became interested in fine art, like capital F, capital A art. And, I thought, I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to be a serious artist making, meaningful work that's going to be in art galleries and museums. And so I was making paintings, and came to Chicago to attend the School of the Art Institute here, to work on my Master of Fine Arts. And I was painting there, and I felt like something was missing from my paintings. And then I had a really horrible critique where the faculty were like, yeah, there's definitely something missing. We're not sure you're cut out to be an artist even. And so it was this kind of pivotal moment where I was, geez, like, this is my whole life dream, is to be an artist. And then I was like, well, when art's not fun right now. But when I was a kid, like, drawing comics, that was always fun. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a break from painting. I'm just going to draw some comics, and try to draw like when I was a kid, and just not think about all, like, the art side of it, just draw things. And the other side of that was, I was being in art school, there's a lot of conceptual art, and there's, a lot of, like, meta content about, like, paintings that are about the history of painting in a painting. And I was like, I'm going to make comics, but I'm going to make them about like as like visceral real life as I can. And so I started writing these autobiographical stories that were just, the most awkward, embarrassing moments um, from real life. Um, and then I was, that turned into the first book I wrote, Clumsy, which is a kind of the story of a long distance relationship. And um, when I show friends as I was working on it, and their response was like showing me that, oh, this is actually legitimate art too, and actually I'm enjoying this, and I'm communicating ideas and expressing things that I wasn't able to in painting. And so I'm not cut out to be a painter. I'm a cartoonist.
Well, let's talk about Clumsy because I dabbled into it, and I admit I didn't realize that you could actually until I joined NBM recently, and until I started reading comics myself, that comics can be based on regular everyday people. And I enjoyed the the idea of the long distance relationship. I feel like that's very relatable even now. So like
Mm-hmm.
how everyone says dating is terrible, and I felt like it was so raw for you to just kind of give some of the most embarrassing parts of your of your life in that way. So how did you go about presenting this as this is the change maker, the breakout piece of literature that you're publishing? How was that process? Like, how did you get to that point? I know you just mentioned that friends
Mm-hmm.
were relating to it, but how did when did that moment hit for you that this was going to be the one that will introduce Jeffrey Brown?
I mean, it was kind of like unintentional, really. So being in art school, one of the ideas I had, so I drew the whole book Clumsy in a blank sketchbook. So there's actual like an original hand drawn copy of Clumsy, and my original idea was that um, it was an art object, like it instead of comics, which like you go to the comic shop and there's like the floppy comic books are there, there's thousands of copies of them. And I was like, well, I'm going to make a comic and there's only one copy, and it's it's like the actual hand drawn version. Um, but then I was like, well, I'll print up, I'll make like a few copies, like so I can give to friends, and then maybe like if I have enough, sell some at like the local shops. So being here in Chicago, we're fortunate to have a ton of great comic shops. So um, I did Xerox editions. I did 100 Xerox editions, and each one actually I put like a piece of ephemera from the relationship. So I had like plane tickets and like little notes and movie ticket stubs, and so each of the 100 copies had like a little artifact from the relationship, and then um, printed up 100 copies, gave to friends, and then sold some at the shops around Chicago. And um, the then I started to get more response and realized like, oh, there's actually like a bigger audience for this thing that I really came out of writing for myself. So one was the creative side, like I needed to do something different than painting, and this was a way to do it. So that was like the one impetus to make the book. But also like I was in this relationship and thinking about how relationships are portrayed in media, maybe less so now, but like 25 years ago, like it's like every relationship that you see in a movie or a TV show, it's like it's either this amazing fairy tale romance or it's like the most awful toxic relationship that's ever existed. It's like, and I feel like like really most relationships aren't either of those. They're just like it's just dumb moments. Like there's some really fun times, there's some like sad times, but most of it's just like awkward everyday stuff. And so I
Right.
was like,
Those.
yeah. Um, and so that's really what I wanted to like get at. And yeah, and then so self-publishing like those first copies like showed me that like, oh yeah, other people get it, and like they're also interested in seeing those moments.
Wow, that's very interesting. I also self-published a few years ago, completely way off from comic books. And you did this during the time. What was the time like for publishing? This was what remind me, 2002.
Yeah,
So like I'm hearing a lot of footwork being done as far as getting the word out there that your book has been published. How would you say the distribution and promoting your book, how would that differ from today with
yeah.
your recent
I
publication?
mean,
How do you feel? Do you feel like the core process of getting the book out there is still the same for you, or has it changed?
it's definitely different now. Like back then, internet was still kind of new. There was no like social media was like just in its infancy. There wasn't really, like it wasn't like you could put something online and everyone would hear about it. It was like still. Uh, I was fortunate, so I became friends with another cartoonist here in Chicago, Paul Hornschmeyer, who had self-published a lot of his comics, and so um, I learned a lot from him about like how you get your books into the comic shops and going to comic conventions, and so it was really like just kind of a gradual process of building up an audience where um, I would get the books in the shops here in Chicago, then someone in a shop in another state might hear about it and they might write to me and say, hey, can we sell a few copies on consignment at our shop? And then I was also writing, like I would know of other comic shops around the country and in Canada, and I would write, hey, I've self-published this book, would you sell a few copies on consignment? So it's a lot of like, send out 3 copies, and you know they might sell in a few months later, and you get your check for $15 or whatever. um, and then it just builds over time. And what happened was so I did the 100 Xerox copies, and then I did a professionally printed run of 2,000 copies. And so because I sold out of the Xerox ones, and there was still like, I felt like it could go further. And um, I submitted it to publishers, and publishers had all passed on it. But one of the comics publishers, Top Shelf, had offered to help me distribute. And so what they did was, like, when they would, as a publisher, go out to like comic conventions like San Diego Comic-Con, or back then it was Wizard World was another big convention. So they would have all their books that they published, but they would bring a couple copies of my book. And so um, slowly over time, like the audience just kind of like more people were hearing about it. And eventually I was selling out of the copies that I had self-published, and Top Shelf was like, uh, said, like, we can keep distributing, but would you like us to take over publishing? Because now, like, it's like I think maybe they didn't see the full potential or interest for it when it started, and then yeah, over time, like the audience grew. So
That's amazing. A lot of commitment there, from 100 copies from Xerox to 2,000. That's amazing. Congratulations on that. So we did mention that most of your recent comics are inspired by interactions that you've had with your youngest of two sons.
mhm,
And when I read Darth Vader and Son, obviously we know that the whole "I am your father"
mhm.
line from Star Wars. How did you get to that point where, you know what? Well, let's develop what it would be like to see Darth Vader, the Darth Vader, in a role, in a humbling role of being a parent and having to answer to this little human being that in other in the real Star Wars realm would not be quote unquote your son will actually be your enemy. So how did
Yeah,
you get to that point where you're like, okay, let's play on this whole I am your father um, with Lucas?
yeah. It was kind of a lucky, I mean, it was just a lucky right place, right time, right situation. Um, so over the years after Clumsy, I published more autobiographical comics. I also did, some humorous parody science fiction and superhero comics. Like I did a Transformers parody called Incredible Change Bots. Um, and so I kind of built up, a whole like little library of books I'd done over the years. And one of the people I had met at some point um, was a guy who ended up working at Google for the Google Doodle team. So the Google Doodle is the how the homepage for Google has a different image on holidays, and or they might have um, kind of a special image, or sometimes it's an interactive game. So they have a whole team of people at Google that make those, but every once in a while they'll invite an outside artist to do the Google Doodle. And they had this idea um, for Father's Day, um, something with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, and instead of um, battling for the fate of the galaxy with their lightsabers, they just had to do something awkward every day, like how awkward it would be if they just had to go grocery shopping together, or sit down for family dinner. Um, and so they asked me because they thought, like, well, I all my autobiographical works about these awkward everyday moments, and I'd also done all this humorous kind of science fiction work, and I'd become a dad. So they thought maybe I could do something with that. And um, as soon as he pitched the idea to me, I thought, oh, my son was 4 years old at the time. What if Luke Skywalker was 4 years old? And Darth Vader is just doing all the things that I'm trying, like, try to get him to go to bed. And, like, you're making eggs for breakfast, and then he decides he wants cereal. And, um,
Or when
like
for
these
Halloween.
little, yeah, these little typical moments. And so I did up like a dozen sketches, literally the night he called me, and, sent them off. So they were waiting for him the next morning. But in the end, Google decided not to use the idea for their doodle for whatever reason. And um, so I was like, oh, that would have been a fun project. But then I was thinking about it, and I published books with Chronicle Books, who had also done a lot of work with Lucasfilm. And so I knew that, like, the chances of me, like if I send an idea to Lucasfilm, they're not even going to see it. Like, they're not going. They don't take pitches, and this was before Disney bought them, so it's even, like, probably harder to pitch something to Lucasfilm at this point. Um, but I knew Chronicle had worked with them, so I thought I took the sketches to my editor at Chronicle, and said, "Do you think, like, if Chronicle took this idea to Lucasfilm, like, they might be open to it?" So we pitched it to Lucasfilm through Chronicle, and they liked it, and so then was able to turn it into a full book. And yeah, so it's like, um, just, like, I'd met the guy that from Google, like, years before, when he wasn't even working at Google, and, like, I think we either traded mini comics or zines, or maybe he gave me his zine and bought a copy of Clumsy or something. But and then years later, it turned into that book.
Oh, look at a full circle moment we got there. So, to your point about having to use one channel to get to Lucasfilm. How does your approach with licensed work differ from your personal projects? Because it became
Mhm.
one book, and then one book became two books. So, and,
It
and beyond
was
that,
like
how does that look?
yeah, I mean, so it was kind of like it ended up being kind of a natural transition where I did Darth Vader and Son, and then um, what happened was while I was working on that book before it came out, Scholastic had gone to Lucasfilm and asked about doing um, a middle grade Star Wars book, and my editor on Darth Vader and Son at Lucasfilm said, "Oh, you should see if this guy's busy." And so he put me in touch with Scholastic, and so then I got to do the Jedi Academy books, um, and then that so it turned in one Star Wars book became a half dozen very quickly, and then I think I'm up to 12 or 15. I don't know how many at this point. Um, and so it's it's been like kind of um, what happens is that then other publishers or licensors see those projects. So um, there's actually DC Comics. Then they were making a push to like really uh, like have more younger reader comics with their heroes, and they had the idea of like asking artists and authors who weren't the normal like Batman, Superman artists and writers for their normal comics. And so um, DC had seen the Jedi Academy books, and they thought like, oh, maybe Jeffrey would be interested in doing a middle grade DC heroes book. Um, and so then I was able to do the Batman and Robin and Howard books, um, and um, and then I've gone back and been able to do some Marvel books now with Chronicle, um, because after Disney bought Lucasfilm, and then a lot of the people are all familiar with the work, and so um, my editor at Chronicle was like talking to talking to people at Lucasfilm, talking to people at Marvel, um, and then my name comes up, and they're like, maybe Jeffrey would be interested in doing a Marvel book in the style of Darth Vader and Son. Um, so it's been very like one thing leads to another, kind of like, um, and then as far as the difference with those projects is a lot of it is driven by um, you know the the parameters of the property. So like I've been fortunate to like have my own take on Batman, but there's still like limits to that, and I still have everything has to be approved by them. Whereas when I'm doing my own work, there's so much more freedom, um, and so it's just a much different process where on the one hand you don't have those parameters, you also don't have all like the scaffolding that comes with it. So it's one of the like advantages to doing Star Wars books or Batman books is that I don't have to create the whole world and write the backstory and explain everything, whereas
It
um,
already exists.
yeah, so when I'm doing my own work, then I have to there's other considerations and other work that goes into it.
Nice. We're hearing a lot of great feedback from editors and publishers. I want to know, what was the feedback like, the initial feedback from parents when you came onto the scene with comic books like Darth Vader and Son? The kids are still weird, and cats are weird. So how is that? How has your work been received by parents?
I mean, that's one of the interesting things was that with Darth Vader and Son, I intent like that book was written for for the parents, um, and the feedback was that actually like the parents were all saying like my kids love this book. In fact, the one thing I would hear a lot is like, yeah, I got this book and then I couldn't find it because my kid kept taking it and, like they keep taking it to read in their room. And so there was a shift where the response from kids was so much greater. And so with Darth Vader and Son and those books, it was kind of, I realized that I was showing these situations and parents could appreciate them from their point of view, but then kids were appreciating them from their point of view. And then both, like if you're a Star Wars fan, then it's Star Wars. So, and with Kids Are Still Weird, it's the same thing happened. I thought Kids Are Still Weird would be even more like, okay, this is more for parents. Like there's no stormtroopers and Darth Vader and Chewbacca and like there's no spaceships and aliens. It's just kids. And so like this is the book for parents. But there's it's another book where kids find it really funny. Like kids like think like they see kids say funny things and like they get the humor just as much. Maybe not, like maybe it's in a different way than the parents are getting, but like but yeah, so the response has been really great. I think in both kind of series, with whether it's the Star Wars books or with the Kids Are Still Weird, there's a sense of like seeing that someone else is also going through the same thing, right? Like your kid freaking out about candy at Halloween, or so I think like for parents especially, I think it's like a way to commiserate with each other. Like, yeah, like it is, like kids are funny, like, and also like terrifying sometimes.
Funny and smart.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the things that your children come up with, I was thinking about, I think one of the last quotes where I think you guys were in the store. His name is Simon, and he's looking for the one that doesn't cost any dollars. And I'm like, well, that is such an adult concept.
Yeah.
And kids do that a lot. They surprise us, especially with the things that they're able to come up with.
Yeah.
Or the concept of my name is Simon. Simon says.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting
Yeah.
perspective to kind of see how they see the world. And I think you did an amazing job with that book. So we know that you're a cartoonist. We know that you work with Lucasfilm. We know so much about your accomplishments as an author and as a cartoonist. I wanted to touch base a little bit on things that you do outside of being an author. I also read that you were an instructor at SAIC, that you are also a speaker. Tell me, like, what does your world look like outside of comic book writing now, especially being a family man and still having other ventures that you're pursuing?
Yeah, I mean, it's like in a way it's still all tied together, because it's like, even it's like if I'm getting up on Saturday morning and making pancakes, like that's like that's a scene that plays right into like the Darth Vader and Son. But yeah, so with teaching, yeah, I don't know what it is about teaching, because like growing up, I certainly never thought of myself as a teacher. I don't think I'm particularly comfortable speaking in public, even, or like in front of crowds or people. But I find it really rewarding. So teaching at the School of the Art Institute, it's undergrad, college classes. It's a studio class, and so it's not lecture, which makes it a little easier. But basically, like every week is setting the students up with a project or an exercise, and then working with them one-on-one with any questions they have, or like kind of like making suggestions or giving feedback. And then we critique the finished pieces. Although the class is kind of designed for things to like be okay if they're not finished. It's more about learning how you make work and what that means. And so I find it like the one of the things that's really rewarding about teaching is that it forces you, like if someone's drawing a comics page and it's not quite working, you can't just say like, yeah, that page isn't working. You have to be able to tell them like, oh, the reason it's not working is because what you've done in this panel here is like this character is doing this, and like so now when you go transition to the next panel, like this doesn't make sense. And so you've got to like actually pinpoint um, what about the comic isn't working. Like, you know, like is it the panel layout, um, the pace is too slow for an action comic, or um, things like that. So in a way, like teaching has been really beneficial to making the work, because it makes me more aware of like when I'm working, then I'm like sometimes seeing things that like if I was teaching myself, I would notice. And then I also like I'll talk to a lot of elementary school and middle schools, um, and that's also really rewarding in a way, different way, where one of the things about being a cartoonist, or I think author in general, is you're spending a lot of time just working by yourself, and there's not a lot of feedback. It's not like being a musician where you go out and play a show and there's like this audience cheering. But if I go and talk to a middle school or elementary school, then I like sometimes do get a whole audience of kids cheering, and there's something about kids especially that's just so like their enthusiasm is so pure and unjaded, and um, it like it's just it kind of is, makes this like inspiration feedback loop where like talking to kids about my comics and making work and my like having a career as a cartoonist, and like seeing their like response, and like the joy, and like getting mail from kids like making their own comics and like talking about their writing their own stories, um and thinking like, man, like when I was a kid, I had all these cartoonists and authors and book illustrators that I like looked up to and inspired me, and like now like it's amazing to think like, oh, I'm doing that for other people, like for this new generation. So um yeah, it's like the side of like comics um it's you don't always get, where you know it's like you work on a book for a year and you don't know what anyone's going to think of it, and until you put it out into the world. And so um definitely like giving talks at schools and libraries is really rewarding to kind of like see the actual impact like the books can have on people.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's almost like children are pouring back into you without even knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I'll ask you one last question. You answered a lot of my questions. So early on, I was like, my. Okay, how do I? Let me find the most unique ones. All right, so let's wrap it up with this. So, what advice would you give to aspiring graphic novelists? You mentioned so much about how in the beginning you went to the fine arts and you were doing your own
Mm-hmm.
comics, and there's a lot of critique there. So, what would you say for someone like the next person that has no
Yeah.
artistic fiber in their being? Like, how would you advise them?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, especially if you like for um, people who think they're not artistic, is a lot of drawing isn't talent. It's just practice.
Mhm.
Like practice is like I think I'm a pretty good at drawing, but I've been drawing for almost 50 years now. So it's a lot of drawing practice. And so I think that's one thing. And with comics especially, the thing about comics is if you have like a really great story, but the art's not very good,
Mm.
it can still be a pretty good comic because it's about the story. And if you can have really great art, and maybe like if you're really talented as an artist, but if you don't have that story, like the art's not going to be enough to keep people's interest in reading it. Um, and so I always say that uh, um, that if you practice and you like keep working at it, is one thing. The other thing I would say is, especially if you're starting out, is don't get caught up. Don't get ahead of yourself.
Mm.
So one thing I find, and I see this teaching at SAIC, is sometimes people like they have this idea for a full graphic novel, but they've never written more than a 1 or 2 page comic, and it's kind of like they're not ready to write that graphic novel yet, but they really want to. But there's really no way to rush it, and again, it goes back to like that practice. And so building up your skills as a cartoonist by writing shorter stories, and don't feel like you need to write like the like if the great American graphic novel like from the start, like you can build your way up to that. Um and yeah, and so that kind of leads into like the biggest piece of advice I have for anyone, and this probably goes for any creative field, is just keep working, keep making the work, and make work that means something to you. Like don't get caught up like making like the work that you think there's an audience for, or that you think people expect you to make the thing that like is deep inside you, that you just have to get out into the world.
And on that note, we are going to end right there. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Jeffrey, for
thank you.
your time. You're on West Coast time right now,
I'm
right?
I'm central,
Oh,
so
you're
in
Central. My
Chicago.
apologies.
That's okay.
Yes, I don't know why I think anything west of
Anything west of New York that's a very New York way of thinking.
very New Yorker thing. Can't help ourselves. But thank you
That's
so
okay.
much for joining us
Yeah, thank you for
on
having me.
short notice, and hopefully we can do more of these. Before you go, do we have anything in the works that aside from our kids are still weird? I know we
Yeah.
have here
So
at
yeah,
and
kids are still weird. That just is still my latest project. But the next book coming out is from Chronicle. This X-Men book will be out at the end of April, and it's like a Darth Vader and Son style um, book where all the X-Men are kids. And then the next project after that is I actually just got this in the mail today. This is the cover for my next middle grade book with Scholastic. It's called Hulk Teach. So speaking of teaching, it's inspired by my times of talking to middle school students and teaching comics in schools. But yeah, those are the next two, and that one will be out in August. So those are the next two projects. And then I don't know if I have plans for the next autobiographical project, but there'll probably be like some short stories coming, and I'll maybe post on Instagram or different places. We'll see.
nice. Well, thank you again, Jeffrey, for your time. And thank you to everyone who's going to find their way onto this video. And go ahead and show this video some love, show Jeffrey some love. You can follow him at Jeffrey Brown Q. Am I correct?
RQ.
RQ,
Yeah.
RQ on Instagram. I'll make sure that I put the details in the comment section below. Post live stream. But thank you again so much, Jeffrey, and
Yeah.
see you
Thank
next
you.
time, hopefully. Bye.